Thank you, friends, again for being present. For remembering together that although we do feel, I feel fear and grief and overwhelm at this time, that actually we have this deep refuge that's immanent, that's present, that's unassailed of the heart itself, this amata dharma, this deathless, present knowing beyond time, beyond space. And we can bring this forth every moment of turning into this practice of inner listening, which is the meditation method of Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, to listen beyond the waves of the mind, of the world, into the steady, knowing presence, illuminating this moment. So yes, as you saw perhaps in the send-out, I'd like to just reflect on a teaching frame that I first heard actually quite a long time ago from Ram Dass at a teaching he gave in 1994 in Marin, at the Marin Community Jewish Center, where I happened to be with Kitty Sorrow. And this was the teaching frame that he offered, and I've never really forgotten it because it was so helpful. And it really gave me a sense of an integrative map for bringing, at that time we'd not long left the robes, the monastic life, and we were trying to find our way, and this helped give me a map for understanding how to begin to integrate the different levels of our being in relationship to a much more dispersed and increasingly, what we are in now, more chaotic and overwhelming world than is possible to have as in a monastery where things are more contained and focused. So Ram Dass's frame, he gave two actually. This was a teaching frame he gave over a year. The first one was from ego to soul, the movement from ego to soul, and learning to live on different planes at the same time, or understanding that there are different planes of consciousness that are part of our being, that are accessible to us. And then in the second transmission he gave, he added a third plane from ego to soul to beyond. Beyond the beyond, as it says in the Heart Sutra, gate gate paragate, beyond all description. But the first two planes are the ones that we're probably most absorbed into, especially this first one of what he called ego, and this ego consciousness, this sense of self, the storylines of our life. The soul really is the more, in the Theravada they have this word anusaya, which means latent tendency, and it sort of grows into that sense of bhavanga, but the bhavanga citta, the sixth consciousness in Mahayana, the alaya vijnana. This all talks to what we might use loosely in a theistic sense, the word soul, but it is that repository or that storehouse of what actually we might call it the deep unconscious, maybe in a more Jungian style, but it's really the latent seeds, the tendencies that actually shape and bring about, have a great influence in what shapes our life. It sort of carries the karmic momentum, if you like, of what's gone before, what affinities might arise, where we're moved to, what learnings and reparation we might be making in this life. And some of that we might not really consciously understand, but we're drawn into situations, and particularly ones that aren't easily movable from. We can change our relationship to situations that are particularly quite challenging, but they are curriculums, if you like, as he would call the curriculum of the soul, playing out through the sense of self. So these two levels that we shape shift through, and then this beyond the beyond is the deep impersonal. It's actually not really to do with our personal story at all. It is that which illuminates all. It's the profound mystery, the Almata Dharma is a Theravada word, the Almata, the deathless Dharma, the Ajahn Chah called the living Dharma. So it's not out there in some abstract way, but the ever-present Almata, deathless heart. Or the liberation, the full liberation, as the Buddha talked to himself in the Heartwood Sutra, the unshakable liberation or realization of this citta, this ground of being, which is always present. And that you can't get behind. Like, you can reflect on the sense of self, you can reflect on the karmic tendencies, on the sort of curriculum that we're in of our life, but you can't become this beyond the beyond isn't an object to the mind. It is complete, if you like, subjectivity. It is, that's why Ajahn Chah and my monastic teacher, Ajahn Sumedho, called it being the knowing, or being the Dharma. You can only be this because you are this ultimately. So it's not even an effort to be, it's just recognition. It's called recognizing, not an attainment, the beyond the beyond. So to shapeshift, we being human, we can begin to have agility, shape-shifting through. I mean, there are many maps and many planes of consciousness, that these three designate the sort of main territories, and helps us to actually take the pressure off just being so stuck in the main one that we're usually very embroiled with, which are the dramas of this egoic plane. The enormous dramas, the endless dramas, centered around usually me, the sense of me, the endless stories. So Ajahn Chah and in the Theravada, they might just designate this without this middle vibhanga, anusaya, latent tendency. They would put that in what Ajahn Chah called the conditioned and the unconditioned, the two planes. That which is conditioned by I haven't got time in this moment. In fact, the time is running so quickly. I will try and speed this up or leap through some of the main points really I want to share with you. But the map really for understanding conditionality and the unconditioned is the Paticca the dependent origination, which is the expression of the third knowledge of the Buddha on the night of his awakening. So that is for another time to unlock that, but it's like a code, uncoding the structures of what brings about this sense of separative self, and the tremendous power of how that eclipses this underlying timeless state of being, because it's so compelling for us. And I suppose to try and give a quick analogy of what these planes, how they operate, I'm going to draw from an analogy that I quite like, which is going to a movie. So we all, I think, like to go to movies, especially if they're a good movie. And in a movie, you're watching a drama, and if it's a good movie, it will really pull you in to the characters, the storyline, and perhaps within that, we're seeing the drama of this first plane, the sense of self. In the Buddhism, we perhaps don't use ego as a sort of more psychological term that's used, but it's really the sense of self, the shape-shifting of self, the dramas of self, that would be a Buddhist term. But we're completely absorbed in this drama, and very activated in it through like and dislike, through investment, through the sense of where we place power, through all of the experiences we go through in this realm. And so that's replicated in a movie. And we get very affiliated with a character, we're rooting for some, not others. But if we slowed that movie down, and this is the meditation, this is vipassana if you like, it starts to slow the frames down. Because when you don't slow it down, you're just in it. So you slow it down, and this middle level, the Ram Dass's model and the way he talked about it, it's like taking your foot off the accelerator, taking this being stuck to and moving back to awareness. So you can be aware of the content of your mind. Now, not all beings have that knowledge. Mostly they're just in the swirl. They're moving through the wheel of reactivity. But once you awaken to, there is a, if you like, a witness that you can contemplate from a different point of view in your own conscious awareness, the reactivity of the mind, and begin to unhook from the reactivity. And that unhooking is a very important process to actually come across and discover, because you start to realize while there is suffering and difficulty and challenge, you don't have to generate unnecessary. The suffering the Buddha talked about that we can liberate ourselves from is the suffering of the reactivity of the mind to how it is. That doesn't mean to say we don't engage how it is, but we can engage how it is from not generating, from a place of not generating more suffering. Usually from, as Ajahn Chah said, wanting and not wanting of the mind. I don't want this and I want that. That's not actually happening here and now. And it's not a value judgment on wanting and not wanting, because those can be matured into aspiration and mindful, careful, protective ways of contemplating our relational field. But the unconscious movement around that energy all the time generates this agitation. So removing the reactivity or stepping out is a bit like slowing the frames of the movie. You know, there's a moment of sense, there's a visual moment, there's a moment of cognitive thinking that creates the story, and you start to examine the reality of what have you invested in, what reality have you invested in that particular story. And then, you know, we have some things we do want to invest in, but that's a conscious relationship. And it sort of moves us out of just unconscious replication of suffering and reactivity. So this soul level, and at that level, we're starting to really contemplate what's mine to do and what's not. This is, you know, this is like, what is the learning here? What is my curriculum, if you like? What is my skill? What is my karmic propensity? What is mine to do? And what is mine to resolve or to heal? Like, you know, like when I think about my near on 3 decades of working in rural KwaZulu-Natal, in the rural area of South Africa, I have to say I had no sense in this form of this particular sense of self, of affinity into that space or work or what happened and the stories and the dramas that unfolded. And, you know, it was a very profound ground of awakening and learning. And there was so much that happened in that time that still absolutely informs this being in this time here. And the stories that are very similar that we're in, our collective story of liberating ourselves from the impacts of capitalist colonialism, for example, the violence of it, and the big story that we're all in at this time. However, I couldn't understand really why it happened to, why I would spend so long in South Africa, and there wasn't a sense that I could or needed to leave. And it was actually very challenging. And my feeling in the end was it was karma. It was just, and I didn't understand necessarily why. I could make up stories of it, part of being half British, there are definitely massive amounts of colonial karma everywhere, all over the planet. Um, but it became just an acceptance of this is my curriculum. So then you can change the relationship rather than always fighting with how it is. And then that relationship, as it shifts, there are jewels in every situation. There are learning moments. There's medicine to bring. There's compassion to develop. There's patience to be with. There's, ways that we enter a deep agreement with our soul, if you like. We are here for this curriculum rather than and we're here now in this global moment of great need. I think we're all aware now of the massive polycrisis that we face. I'm assuming if we're here, we're meant to be here. This is part of our deep contract, if you like. It's a contract. That contracts can change and be negotiated. So this is the slowing down of the movie, getting a sense of a ground beyond the movie, and a place of, like is said, the more mindful we are, the more choice we have to interrupt the flow of habitual karma. We're not just an automaton running through the patterns and coming to the same place of suffering again and again. And so that we have a choice with space. The awareness interrupts that flow of the wheel, the samsara wheel, the wheel of dependent originating. And there are points in that wheel you can consciously break in the meditative frame. Just a quick, hack into that wheel. The point of meditation is often between contact, feeling, and reactivity. Vedana, the place of Vedana, the place that activates us most is around feeling. Deep conditioning, deep patterning within our conditioning. So to bring meditative care to that place, as Ajahn Chah, to contemplate the emotion, the feeling tones, to contemplate the mind before we react. That is what we will thank ourselves for doing that when we remember, we lessen the karmic impacts. So this is mostly the spaces that we're concerned with. And each of these, like the awareness each of these have different kind of feeling tones of time, of dimensions. They have a different quality to them. And you have very subtle senses in this sort of consciousness, in the meditative soul sphere, if you like. The alaya, the vibhanga, the sort of the places that are not only carrying a deeper tendencies that will fruit and activate in our life, whether to the wholesome, the unwholesome, all the territories in between, but also it helps us to see the luminosity of mind even suffusing and present with the density of the curriculum, if you like. So this is sort of like moving back, getting that space, getting maybe a different sense of time. The beyond really also, it's like a bridge. I mean, it's not really like a bridge. These are just all analogies, because working in language is already separative, and the beyond, the gate, you can't confine in a language form, in a conceptual form, because it is by its nature unconditioned, timeless, unbound, not to be, no word can capture this dimension of being. So if we follow the movie analogy, it's a bit like in the old cinemas of old, which I remember before everything was digital. you might occasionally look behind you and you'd see the light of the projector that you need to illuminate the reel of the movie. And so I don't know who the person is, kind of running the movie, but you might even catch a glimpse of the who's running the movies here. I'm going to leave that in the realm of the to be discovered, the unknown, the weirdness. But, however, the point of the beyond is to recognize there's the luminosity, and this is the Buddha called the papasara citta, the luminous heart, the unbound heart, the unconditioned, the already free. And this is, ironically, the most real, actually. The Buddha in the Dhammapada, he gave this teaching where you mistake the real for the unreal and the unreal for the real. So all the drama is very real for us, and it's very real when we're in it, and especially when we're caught in a battle or something, or a big reaction. And we all know what that is. That's being human. But also it is a dream-like. It's dreamlike. What happened was so important yesterday, and I was so upset about it. And then the next day it was like, what was that? It was just another being caught in the drama of the mind, and fueled by these unconscious tendencies towards separative consciousness, of fear, of aversion, of the other projecting. And as Ram Dass said, when the mind is untrained and it enters fear, is what's happening now. There's such a deep collective fear. And there's a lot to unpack around that. That fear, when it's energized by that unprocessed deep levels of aversion and hatred, and doesn't know able to process it, doesn't have this middle level, then we become very dangerous to ourselves and each other. So this ability to actually see that even within these constraints and reactivities of the mind, there is that which is luminous, that which is most intimate, that which is actually always present, and you can't. It's the most real, because without the luminosity of consciousness itself that's actually operating within us all at this moment, we wouldn't be able to hear, speak, be connected. It's actually the glue, if you like, that creates cohesion. Invisible, unseen, ungraspable. This amata Dhamma, this deathless Dhamma, beyond time, space, undying, nibbana. It's called nibbana, the taintless, the true, the other shore, the subtle, the peaceful, the secure. So it's this primary ground of being, if you like, that we're learning to be, learning to, first we say we take refuge, and then we start to realize it's actually non-separative. It's the essence of being that is really important for this time, really important. Because if we've invested, which we all have, in our massive, the myth, the enormity of our civilization has been about, on this transient earth where all returns to dust, creating permanence, security, stability, that which we can rely on. However, all returns to dust. So if we don't have a deeper refuge, then the winds of change, and now those winds have become hurricanes. And all that we've sought to hold security within is being destroyed at great speed. This is activating us in this great fear. And when we're activated in that way, then as we can see what's happening with the inability to process all of the wounds, all of the shadow, all of the fear, all of the resentment, all of that's gone before. Here we are. Now there are those that just want to control it all. That's the solution. Just control it, oppress, use more and more violence. And against those forces, you can't meet it with the same energy. Can't meet it with the same energy. So the primary remembrance for this time, really, however we engage and whatever we're being called to bring our medicine to this moment. Whether it's a song, whether it's joy, whether it's healing, whether it's slogging away in some corner to just help others be uplifted and free and protected, whether it's on the streets, whether it's, whatever we're doing in every moment, to be mindful of the quality of consciousness, to call forth. At first it's embodied in a deity, maybe, that holds that potential for us. But as Ajahn Chah taught and demonstrated himself, that the job of the one that holds that for us is to give it back to the disciple, to point to the disciple that everything you're projecting is actually of courage, of strength, of perseverance, of deathlessness, is inherent already within this own timeless, luminous, knowing presence of the heart, of the citta, heart-mind. So in this changing world, I just finish with, how really it's learning to align with a different source of power. Aligning with a different source of power than the power that we're seeing being used to try and dominate it all, own it all. It's a very deep ask, it's a very deep invitation, because it requires we surrender, we trust something that's more mysterious than the mind trying to control it all and work it all out. And we listen into this more timeless knowing. It's knowing, and it's where the Ajahn Chah ever present. It's guiding. We'll hear it. We'll hear the voice. We'll hear that guidance, especially as the mind quietens. Feel our way through, like the Kogi peoples, of the indigenous peoples of Colombia, the High Sierra Mountains, and their training of their shamans from young age to, in the dark, to listen, to feel, until they feel the thread of Pachamama, of earth. And they listen and they hold the thread, and they can feel the interconnection of everything in this sacred web of life, because everything is connected. So this is our task, to hear that thread. It's also a sense of the sutras means that which threads through this shadow, this valley, that luminous thread of the Dharma, of true, of the reality, the nearest, the most true. And finding that as our source, as our courage. As our guide. It's the great, and this is to quote from that, all of those decades ago, transmission from this great cosmonaut, Ram Dass, who taught so many of us when we were trying to make sense of so much back in the day, quoting the great Anandamayi Ma, who was one of these very unique and rare realized beings He talked about Anandamaya, a great siddha from the Kumun hills of the foothills of the Himalayas. He talked about when meeting her, it was about meeting a wild deer, something outside of this world, a whole different kind, coming from a whole different place, not operating from the social persona. Once, one of her contemporaries, Yogananda, asked Anandamayi Ma, tell me something of your life. And this was her response. She said, Father, there is little to tell. Whatever I did in a spirit of divine service. Hence, I was not quite worldly, though always engaged in household affairs. I had but one ideal, to serve all as God, to do everything for the sake of God. Throughout, my consciousness never associated itself with this temporary body. Before I came on earth, I was the same. As I grew into womanhood, I was the same. When the family in which I had been born made arrangements to have this body married, I was the same. And in front of you now, I am the same. Even afterwards, though the dance of creation changes around me in the hall of eternity, I shall be the same. So the task Ram Dass set before us all those years ago, and it's still the task for this time, for this moment, is can we find that place? While all changes around us in the dance of Shiva at this time, process of creation and destruction, of change, of impermanence. This is the world of samsara. This is the world where all returns to dust. Can we find that place? I am the same. I am the same. There is that which is present that has always been the same. Young, growing up, through all the challenges, all the joys, getting sick, the transitions we've made in life, through aging, through death. I am the same. Sat Chit Anand. Sat Chit Anand. She expresses that same Sat, truth, Chit, essence, bliss, heart, Chit Anand, bliss. Satchitanand. So grateful to Baba Ram Dass, Baba Nimkroli Baba, to these teachings, to the Buddha, to my teachers. Whew. We have many, many jewels that we've received. We've been so fortunate in this life. Now it's our time to bring forth what we can, to offer what we can into this really profoundly, vitally everything moment that is calling us to be here for it in all the ways we can. Maybe so, and so it will be.